Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. Welcome to another instalment to our debut Spotlight series, where we shine a light on the freshest authors and their work. Today, the spotlight shines on the incredible debut novel, I Will Greet the Sun Again. We join three young brothers as they leave Los Angeles in the dead of night for Iran, taken by their father from their mother to a country they barely recognise. They return to the Valley months later, spit back into American life and changed in ways they can't describe. Our protagonist, the youngest brother, begins to piece together a childhood shattered by his father's violence, his sexual identity, and his ever-changing status as a Muslim in America. This novel is an unforgettable portrait of a family being torn apart and a boy emerging from the ashes.
Khashayar J is a writer based in San Francisco. Born in California in 1992, he then spent his childhood in Iran before being raised in the US. He studied philosophy at California State University and worked as a middle school teacher before graduating from the MFA Creative Writing program at Columbia University. His debut novel, I Will Greet the Sun Again, is out on the 3rd of August, and it is one of the most beautiful novels we've ever had the pleasure of reading. And we are so excited to have Khashayar joining us today. So welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you for your sweet words. It's so nice to be here.
It's so nice
It's
to
great.
have you.
We will tell the Bookends that we had slight issues trying to get Khashayar on the podcast, and we are extremely happy now that we've been able to pin him down and get him on. So our first question to all our authors is, what are you currently reading?
Oh wow. Great question. The reason that I have and maybe other people can relate to this, but I find reading several things that I have my stack of books here right next to me, so I'm looking through that right now, and I love reading through poetry collections, as well as novels and nonfiction. I mean, I think like the rest of us, I'm a big fan of Caleb Azumah Nelson's, and so I think I just need to say Small Worlds. Also, that was something I read in recent and not currently reading, but just had to mention that. And I believe it was nominated or won the Pulitzer this last time. But the poet Carl Phillips had a collection and selected poems released called Then the War. That's what I'm reading. Savage Tongues by Azareen van der Vliet Oloomi. Chain Gang All Stars. I'm reading Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. The Demon Copperhead is interesting because I growing up didn't, and I need to get to Charles Dickens, but I didn't read Charles Dickens, so it's nice to kind of read a book that I believe is sort of pulls its inspiration for that. And the last two I'll say, The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing, and in a recent interview I came out real hot and said I'm convinced Middlemarch by George Eliot is like the best novel ever written.
Wow.
The sentences in that book, what a writer. It's extraordinary. It's so decadent. So that's what's occupying me at the moment.
Wow. Now, usually we get like maybe 2-3 books. That is a full-on stack. Amazing.
Stack. And you do all of these at once? You dip in and out?
Yeah, I dip in and out, because of course, like, the books I mentioned, tone is different, the time period it's written in, the writers, the identities that they operate under. Like, I just need to fill different buckets within myself, I think, and so I turn to writers for that. And maybe it's I don't know, sometimes I feel a little silly about it. I know it's maybe more proper to start something, finish it before moving on, but I'm too needy. I think. I'm not able to just stick to one person or one book. I need more than that.
Oh, who cares about
that.
proper? Nobody cares about proper. Like, break the rules. Let's do it.
I have a massive amounts of respect for that. Like, that is incredible. Like, my brain I don't think my brain could take on so many different things at once. I think my brain would probably shut down at like the third book. But being able to do all of that, and yeah, I just love the idea of filling the different buckets within yourself. That's a gorgeous way of putting it.
It's like a little kid who is choosing, you're like starting primary school, right? And you're like, and you're sort of meeting friends, and you're like, oh, that person's so cool, and we do this together, blah blah blah. And then somebody else comes, you're like, oh my God, but I like their style too, and I want to hang out with them, and so that's kind of, I don't know, every time I open up a book, I was just amazed that we get to experience this. I'm so grateful for writers that they sit down and they do this stuff. Yeah, so I just love getting to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it depresses me all the time thinking about the fact that I'm never going to be able to read all of the books on this
Right?
earth.
Ugh,
It makes
So
me
yeah.
sad.
so sad. So, as this is part of our debut spotlight series, we like to start off by asking our debut authors about their experiences in having their debut novel published. But I feel like you've got quite a unique experience, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that I Will Greet the Sun Again was acquired in a 7-way, 7-figure auction in the US, which I wouldn't say is a very common welcome for debut authors. I would say that's pretty outstanding and
I
cool.
wish 7 figure. That would have been love. I think my studio apartment would be much bigger if it was 7 figure. So it was. There were several editors involved, but it wasn't 7 figure. But I think we could just pretend as if that it
That
was.
was I have definitely like written that down straight
I
from an
think we
article.
projected
So
into that.
someone somewhere has definitely written that in an article, because I have written this down word for word because my mind was blown. I was like, what? 7 figures?
You're
You
like, I
know
read
what?
that shit. It wasn't worth 7 figures.
I love that.
If I had 7 figures, I'd have given it to you. Let me
Yeah.
tell you. Unfortunately, I'm a poor actor, so that doesn't happen.
We cannot do that. But it was still there was still clearly competition for this novel. So what was that experience like?
You know what it is? It's like, you go into this, and my agent was really, I think, prepared me for it in the sense that he and I had worked on getting the manuscript ready for submission, and I still remember this was back, it would have been in 2020, and I still remember it like it was yesterday, which is like once we felt it was ready to go out into submission, of course, had the best hopes for it. But I remember very specifically him telling me, like, we just, there's no guarantees. People are submitting manuscripts every day, loads and loads of them. And obviously that also would have been like right a few months following the shutdown, and there was, the uncertainties of that on top of everything else. And so, to answer your question, like when editors had shown interest and wanted to chat with me, I was just thrilled that it became evident that the book would be taken on and then one day published. So it was less about like, oh, this is hot shit, and there's this kind of like, competition behind editors. I was in awe, and I couldn't believe I had the chance to talk with really bright and astute editors about the book, and then to have, to go from will it be published to, oh my God, I can choose now who I feel I want to work with. I mean, that's I'm glad you asked that. I need to remind you go through revision, you go there's publication processes have so many stages, so one forgets about those early stages. But I think I need to remind myself about how exciting that was, and how grateful I felt.
Yeah,
Mm.
I imagine it's the sort of wave of press that you have to do as the book's coming out. It can be quite intense. And I think it's totally fair to say that it is intense, but I just think, yeah, that is incredibly cool. And I'm not even vaguely surprised that a lot of people wanted to get their hands on this, because we absolutely adored it, and we don't say that lightly. Like, we genuinely love this book so much, and we messaged about it all the time whilst reading it, because we were like, this is just so good. And you know what, I knew, as you mentioned Caleb Azumah Nelson before, like, I adore him and his work, and I knew when I saw his name on the back and the way he was singing praises of this book, I was like, okay, I know this is going to be good. But then to experience it for myself, I was like, wow, it was just completely blown away. So thanks for writing it.
So I so appreciate that. I so appreciate that. Yeah, you know, it as y'all introduced it, you know, it deals with, you know, some big themes, and I think as I kind of look at the book now, and I kind of marvel, you know, one, there's the desire to write about these big themes, but to then write within those themes from a young person's perspective, you know, and to follow him over, I guess God would be like, you know, about 10 years or more than 10 years, but it's also it's not a massive book. And so we're, you know, I just I admire the kind of, and then on top of all that, I also, the way when I read through the book, I feel it's also very quiet. It's a very quiet book, which may sound strange considering the big themes that are at play. So anyway, it just means a lot to me because it feels from my end that I guess I try to do something so specific and hopefully, you know, singular, and I know that when you do that, it's not necessarily going to land with a lot of people, or, you know, so it's nice to hear that it resonated for y'all.
Absolutely. And I think a lot it's going to land with a lot more people than you realize, because there's so much to identify with. And, you know, talking about, you know, the age of the characters and stuff, you have said that youth never really quite leaves us. And that feels like the essence of this book in a way. So in ways it is a coming of age story, because we do watch someone go from a very young age into the adolescence a little bit later. But so much of the protagonist's youth just remains throughout the book, his youthfulness. What did you want to explore by having the novel set during this really like crucial time in a young boy's life?
Yeah, you know, you know, childhood and teenagehood and adolescence, I think universally, maybe even so, people would agree that it's a very, like, regardless of what identity, ethnic background, like where you're growing up, like race, class, you know, I think the thing that weaves all of us together when it comes to youth is that it's going to be a chaotic time, regardless.
Yes.
You could be living, you know, in the nicest, you know, New York City brownstone, you know, replete with wealth. If you're a 13-year-old, you're a 13-year-old, and you're going to be going through it. Now, of course, the day to day, the quality of it, all those things are going to differ depending on other factors. But so there's that, which is just youth being what it is, and I think, you know, I really relate to the protagonist, to Kay, to the narrator, in the sense that there were a lot of, not just a lot, it seems that when I look at my personal early life, it's not just that there was like a rupture or a few ruptures. It just feels like for years there were all kinds of, you know, horrifying things happening, and yet also a lot of beautiful things.
Mm,
The people I grew up around, the basketball I got to play, the friends, the crushes, you know, all of those things that, if one is fortunate, they get to have. So I couldn't really make sense of how those very like stark things could exist under, you know, within one person. And I wanted to write about that in a way to honor it, and to say, like, and I think last thing I'll say about this is, like, to let myself know that it was as real. I think when somebody goes through any kind of trauma, and especially if it's when you're like young, like I was 4 when my brothers and I were taken to Iran, you know, you grow up and you think, like, that shit really happened, and especially if you're
mm,
in a family that doesn't talk about it, or, you know, God forbid, like, denies it. I think then getting to write about it or create art in any way about it is like, you're telling yourself, like, no, that shit happened. It was real, and therefore I'm real. You know, what I'm feeling is real. You know, all of that.
absolutely. And there's that, I think there's a certain kind of intensity to when you are a teenager or in your adolescence. There's an intensity to the way that you respond and feel things that I think is a bit different to the way that you would feel it in adulthood. Sometimes we can logic things away, sometimes we can reason with ourselves, you know, we can follow signposts to something that may help. But when you are, like you said, when you are like 13, 14, you know, you just feel it, and you feel it as the most intense thing that's ever happened to you, regardless of whether that's a positive or a negative thing that has happened. You're going to feel it really strongly. And I think that that's so evident in the book, this kind of like everything that happens is just so vivid, and you capture that really well.
You know, there's like as you're sharing that, it reminds me, and I totally agree, which is like as you get older and when you are like, let's even take the horror of like the pandemic and what we experience, and when you are going through as an adult and you talk to others about it, there's this kind of, at least in my experience, there's this like, as shocking as the event may be, or circumstances may be, there's an understanding that's like, well, kind of welcome to
Mm,
life. These are the kinds of things
yeah.
that unfortunately happen. We then have to cope with it. And as you said, there are like resources, there are supports, like we'll get through this. Conversely, with youth, there's this, I don't want to call it entitlement, but there's this fierceness of like, no, this isn't what we signed up for, as though like
Mm.
there was some kind of pact, like
Yeah.
at 12 years old. But I just remember with like my friends, there was this kind of deep personal ambition to reject what was happening to us and to fight against it and to reject it, to your point, because we were feeling it so intensely, and perhaps it was something we were feeling for the first time. But that, as you said, as you get older, that kind of like, this shouldn't be happening mentality, kind of fades away, and you learn to, integrate the experience in other ways. I look at, I read some of the chapters in the novel. I'm just like, yeah, he's sort of, the narrator is kind of like, not only is he describing these experiences, but there's this kind of tone of like, there's like this subtext when I read it, and it's just like, it's fucked up, isn't it? It's like, it's
Yeah.
like, that's what he's telling us, the reader. It's just like, this shouldn't be happening, right? I wanted to do
Yeah.
something about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to just go a little bit deeper on some of the things that you've just been speaking about. And obviously throughout the novel, we see Kay sort of grappling with his identity in more ways than one. We see him grappling with sexuality and with the conflicting cultures of his Iranian heritage versus being raised in America, and being a Muslim in a post 9/11 era. That's lots of things for a young person to have to contend with, and it almost feels like the ground beneath his feet is quite unsteady at times. And I wanted to know, what did you want to capture with these sort of intersecting identities?
And I was just thinking about this last night, because whether it's like you said, same-sex attraction, or yeah, being a Muslim, there's also, because of the, I guess this would have really been sparked in the States because of the hostage crisis during Carter's administration. So it's like even Iranianness became really problematic, and that would have been 79, if I'm remembering correctly. So well before I was born. But I wanted to show this because, for to enter a world where these things have so many fraught narratives, whereas for a young person, or at least for me, I was somebody that just wanted to act on my desires. It's like, yeah, if my dad and my mom are praying, that's what I want to do. If they're saying we should go to the mosque, like that's what I want to do. If we're going to celebrate Persian New Year and everything that comes with that, that's what I want to do. And I want to invite friends over. And if I like this boy, I want to pursue that. Like, but as time goes on, you learn that, like, using air quotes, like, those things aren't okay,
Mm.
which is, obviously, it sounds very basic and simple, the difficulties that come from that. But I think I'm still surprised, like you said, there are so many intersections, or so many different buckets of identities that are at play here. And also, like, identity as like a son and a brother and a friend and a neighbor. I think for Kate, I don't think there's like a hierarchy, at least the way I understand him,
Mhm.
of like, this is my sexuality, and like that identity is the most important to me. I think he views all of these things, with, especially being so young, with great importance, and like he just wants to try it on as if it's like drag. But then people are saying, no, that's not allowed. So he's like, okay, well, tell me what it is. I'll try that. And so you see him sort of weaving in and out of those.
Mm.
That's so interesting. And I think, when you're young, the smallest things feel so heightened. And when I was younger, like the most insignificant things would feel like the the biggest problems in the world, whereas for Kay, these are actual like legit things to be like torn over. And yeah, I just can't imagine having to deal with that internal conflict. And I did read that you spent time in Iran as a child yourself, and I wondered if you could tell us what that experience was like for you.
Oh dear, yeah. I think about it, and I've been lucky enough to also go back. I'm a dual citizen, and so legally, like I have to, as an Iranian male, serve in the Iranian army now that I'm of age and have been of age, but through the Iranian embassy was able to get the sort of window of time to, be like, okay, I'll come to see family, but then I won't stay. I'll return. And so that was permitted to me. And getting to go back after, yeah, having been there as a young boy was so gratifying and simply just fun. Getting to see family and meeting the locals and going out and getting to know this country where everyone, all of my, as we say, all of my people come from. And yet I reek of Americanness. I'm such an American person, and so the sort of and the locals love as soon as they pick up on an accent, they have so many questions and are getting so excited. But to answer your question more directly about being there as a boy, because I was so young, to me it's just like these images and senses and smells that I now will refer to when remembering the experience, like what my grandfather's home smelled like, what it was like to, or even like, being at the airport, leaving Los Angeles, arriving to Esfahan, and I mean, God, if the air pollution now is bad, I just feel like it was you needed like some kind of eye goggles just to be able to see. It's the way I remember it as a kid, and I remember being struck even as a 4-year-old and being there with my brothers and thinking like a place that, as far as the environment and the stimuli, the sounds, the crowds, the smells as I described, it felt so harsh, and yet because of the language and the mores and the kindness of the people, it also felt like home. And I remember being struck by how those two things could exist in the same place.
Absolutely.
I loved reading about his experiences in Iran as a child, and him going there, and although it wasn't under the nicest of circumstances, I'm not going to give any spoilers. It was just so interesting to read, and I also really appreciated the food writing in your book. My mother-in-law and my mother-in-law's family are Iranian, so it was really cool to like read all about that, and it felt like a real education for me. So yeah, thank you.
I love hearing that.
So moving on to one of the things that I found most fascinating about the book was that it's told from the perspective of Kay, our protagonist. He is surrounded by a lot of men or boys, and they're all in their own very unique and specific ways, sort of dealing with their own identities, dealing with their own kind of concept of masculinity and what that means to them and what it means to their sons or their fathers. Why did you want to delve into this kind of looking at identities, and particularly the male identity?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it kind of goes back to what we were speaking just a few minutes ago about Kay trying on or sort of expressing versions of his own identity, but I think he's equally sensitive to those around him and as you said, to their identities. And I guess I think it would even go beyond. I know I said he's interested. I think it's like even a matter of survival. I think that's the way he understands. Johnny, who he feels especially close to, who in the States, one of the neighbors in the apartment building that they live in. But as you said, like people he meets on the basketball court or as he's growing up later on when he starts working, and of course his brothers and the people in Iran. I think he's really hungry for any kind of information, even if we as adults know that that information may be problematic or toxic. I think he's so hungry for it that he's willing to not only take it in, but then perhaps enact it.
Mm.
And I really wanted to honor that, even if it, at times leads to some ugly experiences, or as I said, is problematic. I think for at least the way I understand it, and then this kind of I was reminded of this when I worked as a teacher, and I worked in an environment with students who were having experiences very similar to the ones that I had, but also were parts of communities that were very similar to the ones that I grew up in. And seeing them sort of go through that same process, I was reminded, it's like, yeah, that's a part of youth as well, is
Mm.
like learning about yourself through others, being able to survive uh, that complicated time because of others.
Absolutely. And we see him quite often sort of thinking his way through a conversation and navigating his way
Yeah,
through, like, oh, how should I respond to this person?
yeah,
Because they want me to respond this way. So
yeah.
and he kind of is like a chameleon, because he's like,
Hmm.
I have to be this person for this person. And I have to, I'll be like this for my dad, and I'll be like this for my brother who wants me to be tough. And, he's kind of like arranging himself from all of these elements, which I find fascinating. But yeah, he's definitely a social chameleon.
Yeah, I love the way you put that, because especially, some of the conversations the boys are having, or as they get older, and some of the choices they're making as young men. I think there's an instinct where Kay recognizes that what he wants for himself, and really what he wants for them differs. But I think he's not. What's the experience like? Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, he doesn't want to
Yeah,
discard these people he loves, these friends that he loves, even if he knows that, like, the things that they're saying doesn't really sit well with him. And as you said, he's kind of like thinking his way through, like, he's full of shit, but I still love him and
yeah,
want to spend time.
yeah.
I would like to ask a question that is sort of referencing an earlier moment in the book. And as we are a podcast about books and about readers, I am squeezing in this question. It isn't a random one, Lydia, just so I can see your face. It's not a rogue one.
She does this to me every podcast. She puts in a secret
No,
question.
this isn't a
And
rogue
I've had
one.
enough.
I promise it's not a rogue one.
Oh, okay, all right, you
You've got
forgiven.
you've got it, I promise.
Okay,
So
okay.
there's an earlier moment in the book where Kay's brother, I think Sean, encourages him to read a book called Slam. And first of all, he has this habit that really bugs me, where he flicks to like halfway through the book and then reads it and decides if he likes it or not. And I
Shocking.
don't know how I feel about that habit. I'm not gonna lie. Wasn't best pleased.
We love the book, but not that bit.
But with this one, he
He's
does.
9. Can we give him some forgiveness,
No.
please?
It's a child, Hannah.
But he returns to the beginning of this book, which is good. And we also see his older brother Justin later encouraging him to read. Now, I don't know how to pronounce the title of this book. Is it Siddhartha or Siddhartha?
Depending on where you are in the world, I think the answer will be.
That's
I think the
fine.
answer will be
Great.
we say Siddhartha, but I like Siddhartha. I like the way you said the first time. That has a nice ring to it.
I'm just making it up as I go along.
That was more
No, we all.
enlightened.
But I would love to know, because we're very nosy readers. I would love to know what your own relationship to reading has been like, and whether you had similar encouragement from family members to get you to read certain books growing up, or whether you kind of came to books by yourself, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, it makes total. Yeah, I'm glad you asked this, because to me, I think, especially for young people, like, books can be, like, obviously books can be presented to you in very different ways. But I think one of the ways that they can function is as, especially if we're talking like in the 90s or early 2000s, is as media or entertainment. And to this day, it's funny, and this kind of speaks to the kind of, I guess, I was raised by my mom, and the kind of culture that my brothers and I were raised under. There wasn't a lot of outside culture coming into our household. And so to this very day, there will be these like really notable, whether they're animated movies or classics, like whatever it may be. Friends will say like, "Oh, you've of course seen Alice in Wonderland or whatever." I'm like, "Alice in who? Like what?" Which is like crazy because it's like such a big part of, whether we're talking about book titles or movie titles or whatever,
Mm.
it's such a big part of our culture. But I think when I look at our experience, like, we're American having the American experience, and yet it was so insulated. And so for me with books, it really took an effort to deliberately seek them out, whether it was through librarian at school or later on. I remember when I first started working at a bookstore, and it was just all my paychecks would go towards the books, that I was
Mhm.
reshelving and whatnot.
I feel that.
'Cause it was just so exciting to be around so many books. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I often ask myself, if things would have been easier. You hear these writers who, even non-writers, they talk about like being able to escape into the world of a book and how much comfort that brought them. And I wish that was something that I had, but it was cool to kind of project that onto these characters and give that gift to them.
Now, Hannah, have you got another question or?
Another rogue
No, that
question.
was my question. I just love books. I just want to talk
Yeah,
about
no,
books all the
you're a
time.
bookish
Yeah.
girl. You're a bookish girl. I work in a bookshop at the moment, and I also spend at least half to maybe three-quarters of my paycheck on books. Because it's an actual thing. Like, you can't sell books without buying them too. Um, one aspect of the book that I really enjoyed was the way you wrote about physicality. This is best shown through like the physical relationships of the three brothers. I find we see them kind of tussle on a basketball court, or we'll see them, physically fight each other, but in the next breath they're like sleeping next to each other in a bed and having this kind of physical space minimized between them. Adolescence also brings along the more of an awareness of the body, and you write this so well. Can you tell us why you wanted to capture, or if you wanted to capture, the physical nature of the boys in this book?
Yeah, well, I'll sort of speak on the brilliant point that you brought up, which is that I think before puberty, there is maybe less self-consciousness about the body and more, it feels, at least the way I understand it, more organic and natural and perhaps even experimental, whatever that means. Like, and not even just I know often like we think of that term in a sexual way, but like you said,
Mm.
I mean, even just like experimenting with what it means to, you know, play sport or sprint and run or hide, or, like all these, like just to be in one's body as, before puberty. I think it's such a sacred time because you haven't really, I mean, certain experiences can teach you shame, for sure, and teach you to, you start to feel and start to question. But I think if you're lucky enough to escape that, like puberty will not let you escape that
Mm.
self-consciousness or that shame, or feeling like something is wrong. And so I think at the beginning, like as you said, you were talking, like I remember there's a scene where Justin, the middle brother, and Kay get into a tussle, and then Sean, the eldest, is there, and Kay is bloodied up and blah blah blah, and Sean is there to sort of help him and soothe him. And I just love the proximity of that. It feels so rare for especially two boys to be
Mm.
like face to face, for an older brother to be like using bandage and all these things to help. But then there's like, it's like you can't be in that moment and avoid some sly comment about like, bro, you're ugly, or
Yeah.
like you got a pimple on your nose, or like your breath stinks, or
Yeah.
whatever. Like, and I think that really that speaks to my experiences, to exactly what you said, how a moment it could be like so tender and so just like, oh, this is the greatest thing in the world. I have an older brother, who's looking after me, or I've got a friend who's looking after me. And then, in the moment, it's like, of course, you got to make a comment about, how somebody appears, or whatnot. So I really wanted to kind of speak to that because it felt like very true to what those experiences are like.
You definitely did.
And speaking of tender moments between the brothers, which there are many, but there is a particular moment in the book that was my favorite, and I thought it was a really beautiful moment. And it is when the brothers are watching a basketball game, and they see the winning moment between Kobe and Shaq, and suddenly everything feels possible and exciting. And I wanted to ask, why do you think that this moment in particular has such a profound impact on the brothers?
I'm so glad you brought that up because it's funny. It's when I look at the brothers' relationship, that's also and what happens between when they are able to be in one room together. That scene is also my favorite, but that's also because like I'm crazy about basketball. I played all my life. Was crazy about Kobe and Shaq growing up, and so I emotionally respond to it for several reasons. But I also know that in the literary sense, maybe that's not going to be the case for everybody, and some people might scratch their heads, be like, "Yeah, why am I reading this? Why does this fucking matter?" But to your point, to your question, like, yeah, to see these two people a part of this team and are close enough in age to be peers, but are also, Shaq himself often referred to himself as Kobe's big brother. And, these were all like narratives that as a fan and as just somebody that watched basketball, like you were receiving, and anytime there was a controversy or Kobe's being arrogant. He's a ball hog, blah 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 blah. And then in that game to see them not only win. I mean, this is so embarrassing. It's like I'm getting emotional thinking about it, which is
Not
like that's
embarrassing.
so embarrassing. It's like we're talking about basketball, but
Yeah, I love that though.
he like jumps into Shaq's arms, and to your question earlier about closeness with brothers, I think for them it was like, oh, we
Mm.
fight, we've been through these horrible things together. Well, we've been through them together, but really, it's made us as it's turned us into individuals, and then yet we're sitting and we're watching an example of like that you can come together. So there's that intimacy of that, and then I think also broadcasting and especially any LA team is going to do a great job of making it like look really colorful and glamorous, and like you've got Jack
Mm.
Nicholson on the sidelines cheering them on and all these Hollywood actors. And so I think there was also that part where Kay is convinced he can have all that.
I
I love
thought
it.
the pacing of that scene was just so well written. I
Mhm.
I really really enjoyed, yeah, that moment is just it's so beautiful.
It really is.
It is.
And
Thank
also,
you.
it's not embarrassing to cry over basketball
No.
when me and Hannah cry over literally like the stupidest things, but also over any sad book we read. We're like, it's so good. Like this one was another tearjerker. We're like, oh, so good. So, if we're not embarrassed, you don't have to be. Finally, I just wanted to quickly chat about the one woman in the book who really struck me, and I mean, she just shone through the entire time. But that is Maman, who is Kay's mother and the boy's mother. Her connection with the younger brother, with Kay, is beautiful, and there is one moment between them that broke my heart, and I won't talk about it, but I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. She's so strong, she's complex, she's loving, she's beautiful, she's flawed, she's just fantastic. Does she have an inspiration? Where did she come from? Because she is wonderful.
I think I'm gonna be just like quieted and inspired and intrigued by my mom
Mhm.
for the rest of my life. And so there are, there's a big, I think, rather than like physical characteristics or I don't know, I don't see Maman in this book as like as a sketch of my mother from my life, but I what I do see is the emotion that I felt in proximity of her, growing up is something that somebody that did everything in her power to provide for for my brothers and I, and yet similar to Maman in the novel, has her capacities. And I think for maybe all children, but I'll speak to myself, like especially as a sensitive queer boy, language I think was the most important thing that I needed, the comfort of words, and it wasn't something that my mother was able to provide for different reasons. And so I think when I was writing Maman's character in the novel, that was kind of the place that I was coming from was, okay, here's a person that might be emotionally removed or there might even be quite a bit of silence, but I really wanted to give that silence texture and to understand it rather than it just be like my mom's unavailable. She's a ghost-like figure. She's got her past of trauma. She's dealing with a lot, and that's that. But it's easy to fall into that. But I wanted to, I don't know, give her some more dignity than that. Even if she's not able to give Kay what he wants, there's still, I think that's what I admire so much about their relationship in the book, and also what I admire so much about. Can you believe this? Just last night I was thinking about this, and I was like, it got me to cry because the memory I had was being in the apartment, and my mom was like always working crazy shifts at the hospital as a nurse, and then like would come home, get a little bit of sleep, go back to work, and I had this memory of like my way of connecting with her or showing my need or want to connect was by doing the dishes. I could really wash the dishes really well. And I just had this memory of like standing at the sink and washing the dishes and her being asleep on the sofa. And I was feeling emotional about like having this desire to want to just talk to this woman who felt, somebody I both admired but felt estranged to. And yet, what's amazing is like there was a lot of storytelling in my head that was happening. It was like as though I was describing for somebody what Kay ends up describing in this book. But that would have been 20 years ago, and I was describing it for myself. And that is just a very long way to say, I guess there are even from like silences and like hardships, I guess there are some beautiful things that can come from it because that's where the voice of this novel came from, was from those silences.
Absolutely. I just love that. I love the fact that you were just doing the dishes for her. Honestly, it's very moving. It's
She was
very moving.
a beautiful character, and I just know that people are going to go mad for this book. It is just so incredible and just so I'm blown away that it's even a debut. Like I don't even understand how you've managed to produce something so like wonderful at first try. So yeah, that is amazing, and I can't wait to see how well this is going to be received because I just know it is going to have the most amazing reception. I'm predicting it now.
Thank you, you too. I feel like I could talk with you all till tomorrow. This is so enjoyable. Thank you for spending such yeah, just dedicated time with it and for your questions. It's so nice to chat with you both.
Oh, thank
You
you.
too.
Before we let you go, can we just quickly ask what is next for you?
A lot of the questions and sort of circumstances that are brought up in this first book that happen both in Iran, but also in the States, and of course, like there have been a lot of horrifying things that have been happening to women and women's bodies in Iran, in the last few years. But in a way, it's like, I guess because of the access we have to social media, we're hearing about it, but having had family there and hearing about it for quite a few decades now, I also recognize that these are issues that have been going on for a very long time, and I feel a lot of things about that, and have been sort of writing about those things, and through the eyes of Kay, I guess, is sort of what it's asking to be. I'm still not sure how it's gonna ultimately take shape, but I won't be shutting up for any time soon. So I want to keep going.
Fantastic.
That is
We
exactly what we
don't
want
want
to
you to
hear.
shut up.
No, definitely not. This has been so lovely. I normally ask where our listeners can find you on social media, but I've not been able to find you myself. So are you not on social media?
I'm not cool enough for it. I wish.
You're so
I've tried in the
cool.
past.
So cool.
No, you are correct. You were not able to find me because I'm not on social media.
Okay. I'm sure we'll live, and we'll just, wait by the internet for the announcement of your next book.
Thank you.
But thank you so much for your time, and I'm so glad that we've managed to finally get you on the podcast.
Yeah.
We did it.
We did it. We've got the episode. We've done it. But thank you so much. And to our lovely listeners, thank you for listening. And if you would like to order yourselves a copy of I Will Greet the Sun Again, which is an amazing, amazing book, you will find a link to that in the show notes and a list of all of Khashayar's recommendations from earlier. And thank you so much once again, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye, y'all.